Thank you, Rochelle. So my talk today is about powerful prayer. And when I think about prayer, I think about there's three different levels of prayer and basically three different ways we can pray. And the first one is, give me this or save me from that. It's kind of like viewing God like Santa. So we have this list of stuff that either we want to happen or we want not to happen. And we throw it out there, kind of like a 5-year-old writing a Christmas list. The second level is affirmative prayer. And one of the 5 basic unity principles is there's power in affirmative prayer, which we believe increases our awareness of God. So for this talk, I'm going to talk about prayer and affirmations as the same thing. And by affirmative prayer, we're talking about things in the positive. So, and in the now. I am this, I am that. This will happen, that will happen. Instead of, please give me this. It's more of a statement than a, begging for something. I think it was Deepak Chopra who said, God is not a concierge service. Okay, so emotion is energy plus motion. So we know that energy is what gives things power. That energy flowing in and through and around us, and from one of us to the other, and from one thing to the next. So when I was thinking about this, I got to thinking about when I was a kid. And some of you may have done this. I know I did this when I was a kid thousands of times. And we'd sit down to dinner, and we'd all fold our hands and go, God is great, God is good. Let us take it for our food by his hands. We were fed, give us our daily bread. Amen. And it got to the point where we didn't think about the words. We didn't think about the meaning. We just said it. There's no power in that. And that grace, if you think about it, there's a lot of really cool stuff in that little prayer. But when you're just repeating it over and over and over again because it's the thing that your parents or your grandparents told you had to say, there's no power, there's no energy in that. A lot of you know that I went to the Ho'oponopono seminar with Dr. E. Hayalaka Hulen, and he and I had lunch together, and he talked about before he eats, he just gets quiet for 30 seconds or a minute and just sends loving energy to the food before he eats it. And he sends that loving energy to the people who prepared the food. He doesn't say any words. He doesn't have some mantra that he chants or anything like that. He just sends that loving energy. And that loving energy is what prayer is about. That's what gives prayer its power. And I think when we pray, we need to think about, what's the energy that we're putting into it. Because you can pray for something you really want, but if the energy that you're feeling is I don't have it, that's the energy that's going into what you're saying, is I don't have that. And that energy is going to produce more of I don't have that. So, Neville Goddard said, assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and observe the route that your attention follows. So if we're wondering what sort of energy should we put into that prayer, think about how you're going to feel once that prayer is fulfilled. So if your prayer is that you want a Porsche, think about the feeling of driving that car down the road. Think about the feeling of walking out into your garage and seeing it clean. waxed by someone else. Think about those feelings. Think about that energy. And a lot of us have heard stories of the rags to riches. If any of you have heard Joe Vitale speak, and he was homeless, and then in a short amount of time, he transformed himself to where he was very successful. So if you're homeless, or if your car doesn't start that morning, and you can't go to work, and now you can't make the money you need so that you can feed the kids, you can either have that energy of desperation, or you can decide, that's it. I'm not doing this again. I'm better than this. I'm above this. And then that energy is very powerful, and you can raise yourself up very quickly to where you want to be. If, however, you walk out in the morning and you've got a decent car, but it's nothing special, and it starts and it runs and it gets you to work, the energy to get from that to the Porsche, you go, well, I'm still getting to work. So there's not as much of that need for that change. So you don't have that influx of emotion into that situation. So it's a lot easier just to stay where you are. So for most of us who are kind of getting around, getting along, we need to really concentrate to put that energy in to where we want to be. And one of the things that can help with that is thinking about the 3 different levels of understanding. Sorry, I added this. We'll come back to it. So the first level is, I am separate from God. This is where you're still looking at God as Santa. You know, old guy, beard, sitting on a chair made out of clouds. And you're hoping and wishing for stuff. And even if your vision isn't quite that, a lot of people still see themselves as separate from God, and that's our ego getting in the way. So then the second step is that God and I are connected. And this is where a lot of people have moved to, where we understand that what we do to somebody else affects us. What we do to the earth affects us. And that the connection that's between all of us is God, that life force, that energy. And we try to live our lives expressing that, knowing that what we do to other people and what we do to the earth and what we put out there affects us, because what affects you affects me. So then the third stage is, I am God. And usually when you hear somebody say this, then you get the speech of, the drop of water in the ocean. And I know all the people that have been to Unity before have heard that. And one of the things about God is that God is infinite. And because we live in a finite world, because there is a place where this podium is and a place where it is not, where it has an edge, it has a beginning and an end, it's really hard to wrap our brains around infinite. Mathematicians will sometimes tell you that if you take infinity, which is that little lazy 8, and you divide it in half, you get infinity and infinity. Because there's no limit, there's no way to divide it. If you start with an apple and you want to cut it in half, you have to start at the outside edge, and you cut till you get to the other outside edge, and now you have 2 pieces of apple. If you want to divide a continent into countries, you draw little imaginary lines on a map, and now you have this country and that country. God can't be defined like that. God is not finite. God is everywhere and everything. So you can't split that into little bits and pieces, because God's still everything. There's nothing that God is not. And when we think about that, we need to remember that there's not going to be anything that, if we're thinking about how powerful we are and how we can create things, God doesn't say, well, I don't know if I can do that one. That might be a little too big for me. I'm good enough, I can do this, but I don't know about that. But we say that all the time. And it's because we don't realize how powerful we really are. And that by saying we're just a drop in the ocean that is God, what we're trying to say is, no, I'm really not that powerful. And that's just not the case. We really are all that powerful. We really can create anything that we want to create. We just have to know that. Jesus said, I am in the Father and the Father is in me. I am God. And then he said, even the least among you can do everything that I have done and more. So when we think about that, and when we read the Bible, and we think about the things that Jesus did and all those miracles, that was just the energy of God going through him, because he is the energy of God, and helping those people, not by curing those people, not by making the blind to see, but giving them this awareness that they can make themselves see, because they have that energy and that power within them. So back to Neville again. I will be is a confession that I am not. The Father's will is always I am. Until you realize that you are the Father, there is only one I am, and your infinite self is that I am. Your will is always I will be. So read that again and think about that. I will be is just saying I am not. God could never say I am not, because God is everything. So if you want that Porsche, or whatever it is that you want, instead of saying, I'm going to get that, claim it. Say it's mine. Claim it as yours. So the third level of prayer is knowing that you are powerful and can create anything. It's that saying I am. Some of you guys probably know, because you've known me for a while, I've been doing wedding photography for about 12 years. During that 12 years, I have never had an outdoor wedding get rained on. I know that I always get good weather. A couple years ago, we were in Gettysburg, and it was kind of a cloudy, rainy day. So we went through the museum, and that was really cool. And then we went, and there's a driving tour, and there's lots of different places you can stop, and they've tried to keep the battlefield as much like it was then, so you can kind of see where everybody was when everything was happening. So some of the places we wanted to stop and get out and look because they had more stuff, and some places we didn't. Every time we wanted to stop and get out and look, it stopped raining.
True story.
There were times that we would get back in the car, and before we got out of the little parking lot, it would be raining again. And this happened 4 or 5 times. So I know that I always get good weather. So I was talking to my mom about this one day, and she had something that she was going to go to that was outside, and they were forecasting rain, and she wanted to know, what do I do to make sure that I get good weather? She's like, what's the formula? Was there a chant or a mantra? Or what's the verbiage? How do you say it? How many times do you do it? What's the key? And it was really like an epiphany. Because I said, I don't do any of that. I just know that I'm going to get good weather. And I do. And there's no planning it. There's no mantras. There's no spending 5 hours a day in meditation to make sure it happens. I just know it. And I think that's the real key to powerful prayer. When you know that something is, and there's no doubt in your mind that this is the way that something is, then it happens. Because you are that powerful. When you have doubts, and those doubts creep up, and those doubts take over what you believe, those doubts become what you believe, and then it doesn't happen. So now the trick is, how do we get from level 2, affirmative prayer, to level 3, believing and knowing that it's going to happen? And I think that's with the emotion. As we put more and more emotion into what we're praying about and what we're believing and what we're affirming, then those things start to happen more and more often. You know, we can fool ourselves into believing it. And maybe, you know, it's something little, and then it's something bigger, because, you know, the belief of something little is often easier than the belief of something huge. You know, for some reason in our brains we think that, you know, creating $10 is easier than creating $1 million. I don't think God and the universe care. It doesn't matter. It's, you know, it's a couple extra zeros in your bank account. Who cares? But we have the belief that little things are easier to manifest than big things. So as we go through life and as we put your energy and your emotion into those affirmations and prayers, and you see that start to happen and you see that start to become real, then you start to believe it. And when you start to believe it, then you can start to believe it more and more and more. And before long, that becomes your reality. That whatever it is that you want, you can create, because you are that powerful. I'm missing one. Okay, so the last slide, which I didn't get copied over, is a quote from Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that frightens us most. I think sometimes we get afraid of what we can do because we look back at our lives and we say, if I was really this powerful, why didn't I fix whatever it was that happened before? Why didn't I create this sooner? Why didn't I, you know, make this happen at some other point? And I think the thing to really consider is, if you don't realize that power now, then in 5 years or 10 years, you may look back at this moment and say, why didn't I make that change then? So, to recap, affirmative prayers with emotion. Feel the feeling of the prayer coming true. Feel the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Believe it. Know it. And then when you get to the point where you know it and you believe it deeply, then anything you want can happen. Thank you.